All righty. Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to the GSOE Professional Development Series. I'm happy that you've joined us. My name is Eddie Como, Professor of Higher Education and also the Associate Dean for Graduate Education, joined by my close colleague, Graduate Coordinator Heather Kaleem. Today's series will focus on advancing dissertation projects in preparation for postgraduate opportunities. We invited several guests to serve on our panel, some with whom you might be familiar. So before we get started, just a few announcements. Please feel free to put your questions, comments in the chat. We will monitor the chat frequently. The panelists will have about 5 minutes to respond to a few of my guiding questions around the theme of advancing dissertation projects and preparation and positioning for postgraduate opportunities. And so they'll have about 5 minutes, and then thereafter they'll field questions from the group. Okay, so thank you all for joining us. Again, this is the first of several thematic sessions that we'll have around professional development. And so let me give some brief introductions. I'll allow our panelists to give a sort of fuller introduction. They may want to share a current project they're working on, something they're doing that might be of interest. So first we have Dr. Yasamin Bolourian, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Graduate School of Education at UC Riverside. We also have Dr. Kolluri, who's an assistant professor in the School of Teacher Education at San Diego State. We also have Dr. Guillermo Ortega, who's a postdoctoral fellow at Iowa State University and an incoming assistant professor at Idaho State University. And lastly, we have Dr. Sasha Zedike, who's an assistant professor of child and adolescent studies at Cal State University, Fullerton. Welcome, panelists. Thank you for being here, for being gracious with your time. Let's get started so that we can maximize this time. I did not ask who wants to go first. I mean, we can maybe do paper, rock, scissors, or if you just raise your hand, we can get going with one of you. But I've asked our panelists to prepare about 5 minutes of remark responses to those guiding questions. So whoever wants to start off, have at them.
I guess. I'll gladly start, Dr. Como.
So Dr. Ortega, maybe a fuller bio, and then go into the response, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. That was a great introduction. Thank you, Dr. Como. My name is Guillermo Ortega. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at Iowa State University. I did my, and I'm an incoming assistant professor at Idaho State University. I did my master's at UC Riverside. Dr. Eddie Como was my advisor. From there, I transferred over to the University of Houston, where I did my PhD, and then from there, I landed this postdoc. A lot of my research focuses on higher education, especially looking at the pre-college characteristics of students, and then I look at the college identity, and a lot of that has to do with race, gender, and athletics as well. And then the outcome is obviously GPA, graduation. I do a lot of qualitative and quantitative designs. Where to begin? I think one of the projects that I'm currently working on is examining Latinx college athletes' experiences at HSIs and PWIs, and I'm emphasizing a LaCrit framework with it. So a lot of great findings. Hopefully they'll come out soon. But throughout this discussion, I believe Dr. Como provided us with questions about general writing advice for the dissertation, and I think that's a very great question, but you have to break it down into two characteristics. And I believe there's the general writing advice, which I will provide, and then there's a personal writing advice. So a general writing advice that I learned was technically kind of change your surroundings wherever you go. So one day work in your office, the next day work in your kitchen, the next day work in your room, just kind of keep that flow going. The more you change, the more you'll think about it. And me, I'm a coffee shop person. So I love to work at coffee shops, but I like to change up my coffee shops. You know, after my coffee in the morning, like I'm set, I'm ready to go. You do not want to see me without my coffee in the morning. But pushing that forward, I also think, since we are dealing with a pandemic, I think writing groups is very essential. If y'all could get a writing group, like just get together with some friends through Zoom or something and kind of time yourself, do like 25 minutes here, 10-minute break to catch up, and then another 25 minutes. If you're a person that works solo, I recommend this app called Planty app. And this sounds really stupid, but it's like these trees that kind of grow as like you time yourself. And if you check your phone, the tree dies and you kind of get a connection with the trees. I know that sounds really stupid, but it's like, trust me, it works, y'all. And just like a general writing advice that I learned was always like, if you're gonna take a break, always leave with the start of a new sentence or like the start of a new paragraph. So when you come back, you kind of reread and you're like, oh, that's what I was talking about. And then obviously, you know, there's that personal writing advice. You got to find that support system, family, friends, whatever hobbies you have. And, you know, dissertation takes a lot out of you. So I strongly recommend you reward yourself, even if it means going for a walk, getting something to eat with some friends or something, because it's a very tedious process. And I think this is kind of the most important thing, is that your research matters. You know, you're a badass, like just face it, you know, like you're going to do some great stuff. So like you should be very proud of you where you are. Not a lot of us make it. So it's a great privilege to be here. Dr. Como, did you want me to go answer the 2 questions or just one and then
Oh
switch
yes,
it off?
yeah, you've got time. You can continue on. I see you're flowing, so keep it going.
Listen, I learned from you, Dr. Como. So, you know, when you're talking about like the job market stuff, I strongly recommend this book called The Professor is In. And it kind of teaches you how to, you know, just thinking about the faculty job. It's like, when should you apply? When you're a PhD candidate. That's when you are able to apply for these jobs. Now, when they ask you like what you need, obviously you need 3 to 5 letters of recommendations, your CV. Keep in mind that your CV is going to look very different for a tenure track job compared to a student affairs job, compared to a policy brief job. You always require a personal statement. Research and teaching statements are more required for the tenure track gig. Diversity statements are an upcoming trend, which I think is very crucial, but they're going to be throughout the tenure track, policy, or any other job. And your job talk, obviously get advice from your professor. And something they don't teach you, but I think it's very important, is understanding the hidden curriculum. And what I mean by that is that, you know, it's like you have to go to these conferences, you have to network. It's all those little things make a big difference. You'd be surprised how higher education in general is kind of corrupt, and it's all about who you know. So it's important to kind of pinpoint those things, you know, and don't beat yourself up so much if you get all these rejections and stuff, because it's like there's just things out of your grasp that you can't control. And most of that is people are just hiring their friends, and that's just the reality of the world. So there's things like that that you have to think about. You know, we don't have a PowerPoint, but I usually provide my students with opportunities that exist for grants and fellowships, you know, AHI, Spencer, dissertation grants, Virginia Tech Future Faculty Fellowship, NYU Faculty First Look. For the policy people, the American Council of Education Graduate Research Fellows, that's a postdoc. And then there's also NASPA if you want to enter student affairs. They have these all types of small research grants. And if y'all want the list that I provide, like just email me, shoot me a text, whatever, and I will more than willingly help. That's all I have, y'all. I'm so sorry, but who wants to take it away?
Thanks so much, Dr. Ortega, for your insight. We will certainly circle back with you as we begin to open it up for questions, and I'm happy to pass the baton to our next panelist.
I don't mind going, although following that, I don't know. He acted like at the end, like, oh, that wasn't that good, but it was actually very good.
I appreciate it.
Clearly, you just came from the job market, because you're much more polished than me. I'm here with my children working from home for the past year. Okay, so I did not have children in grad school, which was much easier to get things done. All right, let's see. I'm Sasha Zebike, and I graduated in 2015. My advisor was Dr. Blatcher, and then I did a postdoc for 1 year at UC San Diego before getting my tenure track position at Cal State Fullerton. And so this is the end of my 5th year at Fullerton, which means I'm putting in my tenure file in October. So I'm a little farther along, I think, than some of the other panelists. So let's start with the first one, if I can remember how I completed my dissertation at this point. I am not a coffee shop person. I lived by myself during grad school. And instead of working at home, I decided that the library was the place for me. So I would say to myself, you have to go to the library for X number of hours today and work only on your dissertation and not do anything else, because I can get easily distracted at home, as most people can. So my advice is find what is your place that you can be the most productive. If it's a coffee shop, that's great. If it's the library, that's great. If you're stuck in Zoom land, I think Guillermo had some good advice about, maybe pairing up with people, even if you sit silently on Zoom and it's like some accountability. I didn't really have a dissertation buddy, but I think it would be nice if you were in the same place as someone else in your cohort to maybe set deadlines with one another, because that might keep you accountable depending on your personality. I'm definitely not a procrastinator, so I don't have that issue, but I will say some of my grad school buddies needed that from each other. So I think you have to kind of find your own style, right, when it comes to writing. And it's a good skill to get while you're in grad school, because you're going to need that when you're on the other side, especially if you stay in academia. Nobody's going to tell you to finish your papers. Nobody's going to tell you to do the work, right? And then when you come up for tenure, you have to have the work done. So you have to get those habits started, and like I said, if you're like me, it's best to get them really started before you start having children, because then when if you're like me and you're in your first years of, the tenure track and you decide to have 2 kids, you're going to really need to have good habits. Okay. So that would be my advice for advancing the dissertation project. Set deadlines for yourself, set realistic deadlines. I'm very bad at this. So I'm giving advice that I don't take myself, which is, think about what's a realistic deadline for yourself and set that. If you set unrealistic deadlines, then you might get really hard down on yourself, right? So make sure you're thinking about what's, how much you can actually get done. And then, leave a little wiggle room in there, because you might go to run some data analysis and something goes awry and you're searching the M+ discussion board or whatever it is, And the second question, how and when you should prepare for post-grad opportunities. You should be preparing already. You should be preparing from the day that you enter into the PhD program, which I don't think people really know that, but these opportunities, these positions are getting more and more competitive. I've seen now on the other end, I've seen 2 rounds of hiring within my own department. And let me tell you, these, even this last round, we just hired 2 people this year. I thought to myself, wow, if I was competing against this pool, would I get this job? And this is only 5 years since I got my job, right? So they're competitive, right? The postdocs are competitive. The assistant professor positions are competitive. So you really need to, from the, now is the time to do as much as you can. And one way that I found helpful for me to be productive and get a lot of things as I was going was to never say, I didn't really say no to much. If I was the stats TA in the GSOE for a year. I was on the IRB as the student rep. I basically did anything I could possibly do. And I think it was really helpful for me. The other thing I would say, I don't know if I'm out of time, Andy. The other thing I would say is, kind of look ahead, like who you might be interested in working with, what their projects are looking like. If you can meet them at a conference, put yourself out there, that way, when you go to apply for that postdoc or whatever it is, you've kind of connected with those people already that you might want to work with. And I would also say that almost everyone has a postdoc coming into a tenure track position. I mean, I don't know very many people who don't at least, I had a 1-year postdoc. Most people have at least a 2-year postdoc. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is also be realistic with your goals there. Not to say that you can't apply. I applied when I was ABD and I got a couple interviews, but I didn't get any jobs until after my postdoc. So that's another thing to keep in mind. All right, I think I've talked long enough, so I'm gonna let somebody else go.
Thank you, thank you. You're just warming up. We'll come back to you shortly. We'll kick it over to the next panelist.
All right, I don't mind going if that's all right with you, Suneal. Okay, great. So just as a heads up, I've been getting the, dreaded your internet connection is unstable message. So I apologize if that happens while I'm speaking. But first, thank you to Dr. Como, Heather, and the GSOE for putting this together and for inviting me on this panel. A little bit about me. Over the last 2 years, I've been a postdoctoral research fellow in the GSOE, where I wear many hats and I'm able to pursue multiple research and scholarship projects. My postdoc has extended probably a little bit longer than I would have hoped because of the pandemic. But again, I think this has really allowed me to participate and engage in areas that I wouldn't have had the chance to do if I wasn't around for as long as I have been. But I've had an abiding interest in improving the schooling experiences of autistic students and in kind of supporting their families and educators through increased access to information and resources. My postdoctoral fellowship is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, and we are designing and evaluating a education teachers who work with in early elementary grades. Overlapping this study has been a few kind of community-based projects. I've been funded by the Department of Developmental Services as well as the UCR Center of Health Disparities Research to focus on and support families of children with and without special education needs in the Inland Empire. And I see a few students here from the Search Lab who have really been integral to this work. So shout out to you guys. Happy to talk more about some of the other projects that I'm working on, but I'd rather focus on some of the strategies that would help you in your process and your trajectory. So, starting off with some tips for the dissertation process, I think it's important to realize that everyone kind of has a different way of learning and studying. And I would take some of the time, earlier on in grad school to figure out what works best for you if you haven't already. I have a friend who just this week successfully defended her dissertation, and part of her process was devoting every Friday, starting from early September, to writing a section or a part of a section of her dissertation. And she really stuck to it. Of course, towards the end, she had to kind of dedicate significantly more time to the dissertation, but I was very much in awe of her level of discipline from early on and admired her consistency because it didn't allow her to procrastinate. And as a result, it really helped her kind of control some of the stress that comes along with the dissertation process. What helped me specifically was kind of being organized and setting up my environment. So, we kind of talked about going to different coffee shops and so forth. But for me, pre-COVID, I was, all about reserving spaces in the library because it really had very few distractions. And then after a while, I found that I couldn't really lug around my books and binders to the library. So I just took over my kitchen at home and really, took over that space for a good year or so. I didn't get into any reference management softwares like Zotero, but looking back, I would definitely suggest it. I use it now in writing my manuscripts, and every time I use it, I think, gosh, this would have been so helpful in writing my dissertation. Other resources I would suggest include the UCR graduate division. I attended their format workshop. I utilized their templates. I would also look up dissertations submitted prior to my year. And I was kind of surprised at how infrequently others turn to the UCR dissertation catalog for help, but I was so inspired by some of the really amazing work that students before me had done. And I mean, if anyone is interested in doing that, just Google, how do I find dissertation UCR library, and it'll pop up. And then in terms of kind of thinking about next steps, post-grad steps, there are always things that you can be doing to help prepare yourself for post-grad opportunities. As a graduate student, I remember I did an independent course with Dr. Marcia Ng, and she was sitting on the faculty search committee at the time. And so she used our course to kind of give me greater exposure to what a search committee might look for when interviewing candidates. This was such a great experience. And one of the things we did was look at the different applicants' CVs together. We analyzed them together. She would ask me, you know, what I liked and disliked about a candidate's CV. And she encouraged me to look at everything from aesthetics and format to the person's like, excuse me, collective and listed experiences, right? So we really picked apart what worked well and what didn't. And so that's helped me kind of improve my CV too. And one of the other things that I learned from this process was that quite a few candidates were starting to come out with professional websites. And this was kind of a way for you to put together an academic profile of yourself. You know, like faculty have UCR profiles, but as students and postdocs, you don't often have that. So this is kind of your way to get creative and showcase your interests, maybe some of the courses you've taught or research you've engaged in. And there are some really easy to use tools to build a website these days. I sound old saying that, but things like Wix. So yeah, and even if building a website isn't your jam, maybe just take this time to develop your CV and your other online profiles like LinkedIn and ResearchGate. I think that's something that's really important to do at this time. And also, I would take this time to kind of reflect on your values and your interests, like your values being what's important to you about your next job. Is it location? Is it recognition? Is it resources? And then start pulling and analyzing job posts, right? Like what are the different qualification requirements? Do you or will you have met those by the time you graduate? And if not, what are some concrete steps you need to make sure that you'll be equipped and that you'll stand out from the rest? So yeah, really pulling those things out of the listings that come out. And also be honest about what appeals to you. If it's salary and benefits, then take a look at that, dig deeper. I don't mean to call faculty out, but you know, faculty salaries are publicly available at those who are in public institutions. So don't let the first time you see those numbers be when you put on a cap and gown, or you know, when you're kind of looking for a job. Make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. And then lastly, I would just say, like, you know, connect with folks from different parts of your life and your academic tenure. Even if you volunteered in a lab during undergrad, reach out to the PI or, you know, a senior student that kind of supervised you while you were there, and kind of maintain those connections. Including graduate students in your current cohort. Make sure you stay, it's kind of hard during COVID, but stay connected now because these are your peers and one day maybe your colleagues. So yeah, connections are very important. I'll turn it over now.
Thank you so much, Yas. So important. A lot of these professional tips that you just laid out. And again, we'll circle back with you as well. Last but not least, Dr. Kolluri.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. The advice so far has been wonderful. I hope I have something to add. I feel like one thing I want to emphasize is, like, I think everybody is so different, and my strategies were different as well. So I think you kind of just figure out what works best for you. So just a little background about me. Suneal, I got my PhD from USC in 2019, and then I'm really happy to be back speaking to y'all at UC Riverside, because UC Riverside GSOE gave me my first sort of leg in as a postdoc. I worked with Joe Kahn and Tom Smith on a few projects, and then I transitioned briefly into a UC President's postdoc, and then now I'm at San Diego State University as an assistant professor in the School of Teacher Education. My work is primarily, I consider myself a sociologist of education. I look deeply at educational stratification, social stratifications, and look how they play out in schools, mainly between high school and college. So it's kind of a broad lens, which, you know, may be a terrible idea, I don't know. But my dissertation was on advanced placement and young men of color, and who gets access to these college readiness courses. Currently working on a paper on these same young men and their access to college and their decision or not to attend university. And then simultaneously, I have a project on social studies standards and the portrayals of policing in the standards. So really looking at different ways that pedagogies and college-going policies and schools sort of reproduce structural inequities is what I do. So in any case, a little onto these questions. First, the dissertation. I wanted to lead with this, the thing I imagine most of you have heard at this point, that a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. You really want to get it done more than anything else. It needs to be finished. I think you'll have a support system hopefully you'll have a support system with your mentors who will make sure that they can support you as long as you're producing and getting it done. But I wasn't always on this tip. I kind of felt like a good dissertation. I wanted it to be a good dissertation too. And I think I kind of got there. It was okay. It wasn't as good as I wanted. So I want to sort of talk a little bit about like what I was thinking and what I think worked and what I think didn't work for me. So one of the things I thought worked for me was, I think you want to have like an interesting argument or an interesting couple of arguments. Because at the end of the day, I think you may make this could be a book. For many people it is. Not for me, but at the very least, I think it should be a really good job talk. You want to take what you've done in your dissertation. You want to have some really insightful gems that you can then deliver when you're trying to get a job on the job market. So I think you want to have some insight, some ways that you're pushing the field forward. And I think to do that, I leaned heavily on Michael Borovoy's idea. He's a sociology professor at UC Berkeley who argues he says, and I'm loosely quoting this, but take your favorite theory, start with your favorite theory and look for refutations, not confirmations. I think that's a really helpful way to think about it. Like, because if you just like sort of say, oh, look, here's a theory I really like. Look, I proved it. It's true. And I think we already have the theory there. The theory already exists as something we see as valuable. So how are you moving this theory forward? What parts are you tweaking? What contexts are you seeing where it's applicable or less so, right? Like, I think you really want to, I really want to, I think people want to see you move the conversations forward. And you do that not by just taking a theory, applying it and calling it a day. You take the theory and see where you can push it forward, see how you can challenge it and come up with some insights that way, I think is what I try to do. I think I had some useful insights that I came across, and they were very useful to me when I was on the job market and sharing my dissertation and helping people think through these interesting ideas I'd come up with, because I didn't just take the theory, but I tried to push the theory and challenge the theory and reframe the theory, which I think was an important way for me to sort of think about this dissertation. My advisor, Bill Tierney, was always telling me, like, who are you arguing against here? Think about who are you arguing against? And you don't want to just argue against the people we know are wrong, but how can you argue against people we think are mostly right, but they need a little bit of pushing? That's one thing I thought about. One of my challenges was, I think, for me, and I know this is just my personal story, I think I was trying to make too many arguments. And it all was cohesive in my head, and it made sense, but keep in mind that your dissertation committee is not going to be reading this as closely as you've read it. And you have to really make it coherent and really tight. And the argument, I would actually, if I would write it again, I would have probably done less arguments, saved some for some other papers, and really just honed in on the most interesting arguments and really delivered those strongly and almost repetitively. Because I know professors are busy, and that my dissertation was 300 something pages. Who has time for that? So I think that you want to really hit them in the head with a clear, coherent argument where it comes through really strongly. Is what I would have done a little differently. And then I think a lot of people spoke to some really great systems about how to write the dissertation. I think that tree app sounds really great. Guillermo, I'd love to try that. That sounds awesome. I just did the Pomodoro thing from time to time, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. Sometimes I just, whatever, I was on ESPN for 30 minutes, then found my back to my dissertation, worked for 15 minutes, made lunch. That wasn't great, but it's real for me. I didn't want to make it miserable. I didn't want to make it a miserable thing. So, but I did try to have like a certain amount of pages I wanted to get done a day. Like Monday through Friday, I try to do like 2 pages a day, and maybe on the weekend get 2 more pages at some point during the weekend. When I got to my findings section, it went a lot faster. I could do like 5 pages a day, just because you're just taking block quotes from your from your transcripts and putting them in there. So I think it depends on where you're at, what you want to produce, and sort of I created like here's how much I want to do a day, and some not astronomical. If I didn't do it one day, I could do 4 the next day. It's not a huge deal. So just trying to get a system that worked for me and there was some wiggle room within. Talk about jobs now. I just echo what Yas was saying. Start now. One thing I did when my advisor told me to do was like sort of look at the jobs that were out there and look at the jobs of people who were recently hired and sort of to what extent do you align? I think a lot of people who are looking for people to hire want to see really good alignment. In my experience, they want to see you fit. They want to make sure that you fit the position they're asking for. So what positions do you fit? What types of positions are out there that you can sort of create a scholarly identity for yourself? So when it comes time to hire you, oh, this is a job that I can get. This is a postdoc I can do. So I'd keep an eye out for like, where do you fit and how can you build that scholarly identity, whether you're a first year PhD student or into your 3rd or 4th, 5th years. For me, like networking is really important. I'm a terrible networker. I have like 8 Twitter followers. I'm a terrible conversationalist. I'm not good. So I mean, how do you build connections with people? I think it's something you got to figure out. For me, something that really worked for me was presentations, like conference presentations. I went to like a couple small conferences. And really, I work hard on my presentations. Like a lot of people like will read through their slides like 2 or 3 times, and then or do it on the plane on the way there, and then show up and just read whatever. Got to get the presentation. I would take them very, very seriously. I would probably read through my presentations at least a dozen times, and every time I would add things or add a little comment here, or add an insight here, or add a joke there that really I thought could really beef up and make it an engaging experience for people. And that really worked. My UC Riverside postdoc happened because Tom Smith was at the conference that I was presenting at. And I did a really good job on my presentation. And we spoke afterwards. And he's like, if you're ever interested, UCR is not far from LA. You're in LA. I'm like, oh, okay. So I reached out to him when it came time. He's like, we got a postdoc for you. And that was just kind of how it happened for me. So I think those like connections that you make, the networks you have are really essential. Those are my insights that I have for y'all. But I want to echo everything everybody else said, because that was really useful. It's a lot of useful information here.
Thank you so much, Suneal. Now that you all have laid the foundation for this group, let's now field some questions for our panelists. And feel free to unmute yourself. But if it gets too messy, then I'll have to have you raise your hand. But for now, feel free to mute yourself, and or if you don't want to do that, you can also post questions in the chat. And thank you all panelists for laying this foundation for us. I will take the first question. If others are being a little shy at the moment, I might sort of think about this as a class and start calling on folks that I know here in the audience. But let me take the first question. You all did a good job of kind of talking about the dissertation and how you might develop and advance that dissertation. Maybe talk a little bit more about, because I consider a dissertation, in fact, I consider graduate program almost a selfish time. There are friends that you used to hang out with at the clubs with that on Friday and Saturday nights that you don't do that because you're doing something that you didn't do in the past. You're actually writing at 11, 12 o'clock on a Friday night, right? And so maybe talk about that. Like there's some level of selfishness that plays out there. And if they're truly your friends, they'll be there for you. But also, who are your sources of support? Who did you really lean on to really advance that dissertation project? And anybody can respond to that question.
I guess I'll go. Yeah, I didn't have time for my old friends until I was working on my dissertation. It's a really great point. I leaned a lot on my lab mates. I was at Search. I actually realized I didn't even say what I do for my research, but whatever, it's fine. I think that you need to make some friends that are also in graduate school who understand what you're talking about, because your old friends that are not in graduate school, they don't understand what you're saying. You wrote like 300, or my dissertation was 200 pages. Why would you do that? They'll say to you. And why would you do that, as Yas says, for that salary? So that's not why we do it, right? We do it because we're a bunch of nerds and we like this. But I definitely relied a lot on my peers in grad school. And then also, I'm really close with my parents. So, I complain to them, even though they didn't understand, at least they listened to me because they're my parents and they have to. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, that was interesting. I like that. But I was kind of the opposite because I needed a break from academics. And like I grew up a low income student, first gen. So it was interesting because I was a student athlete. And for some reason, athletics was the thing that kept me and my friends back home in the barrio like together. Like, when I needed a break from academics, I'll just hit up my friends, hey, let's go scrimmage, let's go play soccer. And then we go play soccer in California. It was like the greatest thing ever. And it was strange because you had me, who was a PhD candidate, and then all my friends, some had felonies, some were working in factories, some were pickers. Like we're all just together having a great time. And it was kind of a humbling experience to always remember where I came from, remembering my roots. And then as I kept going in Houston, I just built a new community there, both academically and athletically. So to me, that was a huge part of my identity, just keeping that balance of understanding where I came from and who I was.
I think for me, my process, it's so interesting. You got a great group of panelists here, Eddie, because everyone's kind of saying something different. I really enjoy the diversity and experiences and strategies. But for me, it was too stressful for me to step away from the dissertation. I wanted to work on it day and night, and that probably wasn't the best for my well-being, but that was the only way I could feel like I had control of the situation. So I would work on it day and night. And at the time, my partner we were doing long distance. So what worked really well for me was I would plan, 1 weekend a month of like, get away. Either I would go see him or he would come see me. And that would be the next thing that I would look forward to. And that would help me kind of, reach my next goal in the writing process or the next stage of the dissertation process. And then I'd have a break and have that weekend to just step away entirely and really enjoy, not giving it any of my attention and just enjoying that period of time. And then I would come back to it kind of refreshed and ready to go all over again. So, that was my kind of way to get through.
Yeah, I'll just say my story. I have when I started grad school, I had a spouse and 2 kids. So my friends had already left me long ago. They were done with me when I was changing diapers all the time. So I was mostly, focusing on my family, which I just certainly made time for, though maybe not enough. My spouse started calling me dissertation boy by the end of it. Like over there on the couch, there's dissertation boy. I'm like, okay, just gotta work. But you do it, and you do it. I think you have to have those boundaries. I think that are really important to be able to sort of find a way to connect with others. And those who are close to you. And even I had some friends in the program who went out to movies like once a month, and things like that. So just, finding time, I think, is important, in addition to staying connected with people who give you energy to keep going.
Thank you. Again, let me pause and any questions from the group?
I have a question, and I don't know if it's formulated the best quite yet, but I'm wondering if, about the dissertation mostly, what the timeline is like, I guess, because it kind of seems like the way that it's being described is that it's just like some ample amount of time of like working and writing day and night. And I want to be sure that I'm understanding correctly, like what it will be like, I guess.
I think this really depends on what kind of research you're doing. So I don't know what you're coming from, but I think everyone's going to be different. So like I used a pre-existing data set, a longitudinal data set, and I actually was using the data in a methods class in a like a growth modeling class that I took over in the psych department at UCR, to, write this paper for a class, and it ended up turning into my dissertation. So that if you can do something like that, or if you can write parts of your dissertation as part of your coursework, that's like actually really helpful for moving it forward. But not everyone does that, right? A lot of people collect their own data. And I think that it really is going to depend on your own project. So the sooner you know what you're going to write your dissertation on, the easier it is to form that timeline. And again, like, if you're doing a quantitative dissertation, it's going to look different than if you're doing a qualitative dissertation. A qualitative dissertation, I did a quantitative dissertation, but a qualitative dissertation is going to take longer because you have to analyze all the transcripts or whatever it is that you're looking at. So it's really important to maybe talk to your advisor about what that timeline would look like, because they would probably be we can all give our own insight, I think, here, but I think it's going to vary so much from person to person.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it all depends on like the type of person you are. Like me, I'm a morning person. So I'm always up at 5 at the gym, and then I eat breakfast, and then I just work. And like, I know my peak hours from like 9 a.m. to like noon. So like, that's just something I learned. But, I think I did a 3 manuscript dissertation, and it was qual and quant. So I had like a very different experience, but I was also very fortunate to have a dissertation grant my last year. So the pressure was on me and my advisor, because it's like, if you don't finish, you gotta pay back money. And I was like, I ain't got that money. Like, listen, like, I bought a new Nintendo Switch. There's no way I'm giving that back. So it was just like, you gotta go. So I think it's also important, like, sit down with your advisor and just like have a timeline. One of the key things I would always do is every time I would talk with my advisor, I always went in with like questions that I had, and then I always give it to my advisor 24 hours before. So they kind of knew what I was going to go in. And like, that's how the conversation kind of flowed better. So that's just like really good, helpful tip to have. Dr. Como would be so proud of me if I would have done that when he was my advisor.
Yeah, for me, I didn't write all day every day. I always had other projects going on. I had other things I was working on. So I think towards the end, I wrote pretty much all day every day. I wouldn't work on the weekends very much. I'd probably work a little bit on the weekends, but Monday through Friday, I would write a lot towards the end. But especially beginning, when I was collecting data, I would probably collect data, most mornings, 8-12, I'd be at the school site I was working with. And then in the afternoons, I would probably like just do a little bit of, maybe spend an hour or so. 8 to 12 is probably a heavier day, maybe like 9 to 12, 10 to 12, maybe some days. And then I'd go home and like, type up my field notes, sort of maybe think a little bit about it, and then, do some other work that I had to do, because I was also on a bunch of other projects at the same time. And then, so yeah, I was juggling other things. I was doing my dissertation. It wasn't just that. And then I was, my youngest hadn't started kindergarten yet. So on Fridays, I was caring for him. So we would hang out on Fridays, and I would work. He would let me work in the mornings. I would have him play on his own. I would work for a few hours, but then we go out to lunch and hang out in the afternoons. So it wasn't like all day, every day, dissertation,
Yeah, not much to add to what was, just said by everyone. I think, again, tapping into your advisor and asking about, what's going to work best for you and your project. I think that's really important. I'm having a hard time remembering now how early I started actually, writing. Similar to Sasha, I used an existing data set. And I actually I had a 3-part dissertation and used my kind of advanced stats courses, like one after another, to kind of build on the dissertation. And that was really helpful, because then I was getting, stats advice from my professor who I was already taking a class with, and all sorts of support elsewhere. I was using programs that we were already using in the course that I had access to. So a lot of these things were kind of built in and made it just a lot easier to then, I had my results ready to go and I could just sit and write. So.
Kelsey, I'm going to add something too that I forgot to mention, but when you're in that dissertation mode and you kind of enter the candidacy and you're ready to do that final proposal, which is going to be usually like that your last quarter of grad school, keep in mind, like, you're going to be on the job market too. So you have to balance the academic job market, like all the stuff, the interviews that you have to fly out with your proposal. So it's like, to me, that was one of the hardest things, just balancing out both, because like when you go to these campus interviews, they're like all day, and like I'm very extroverted, but I was drained like the entire day. So I knew I wasn't gonna get anything done those days. So like just prepare yourself for that. And I think that's something very important.
One more thing to add to Yaz just reminded me, when I was my first year of grad school, I became friends with a grad student who was in her last year, and she kind of was a mentor in some ways to me. And I sat in on her dissertation defense. I asked her permission, obviously, because I feel like even though anyone's allowed to come, it feels like, you know, you should ask. But then Yaz came to my dissertation defense when I was a fourth year and she was a first year. So that is also helpful for thinking about timeline, because you kind of have an idea of what it's going to look like at the end. I mean, you don't really know what it looks like to write it all, but it's just nice to see one. So if you have someone you feel comfortable asking, that if you could sit in on theirs, especially somebody from your own lab that's doing something similar to you, that can also be a good thing to do.
Let me mix in a question here. And this has to do with how you chose your dissertation committee. And I'll say this, and it might align with those on the panel. I think it's a strategy, how you think about your committee. So if you all could respond to that process.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So the way to think about it is you have your advisor, and then you have a methodologist, depending on your dissertation, if it's qual or quant. At University of Houston, we had 4, 3 had to be within the college vacation, 1 outside the college. So because I balance higher education and intercollegiate athletics, my outside member came from the College of Kinesiology, Human Health, and Development. So I had the balance, you know, it's like, it was a qual and quant study, mixed method through papers. So I knew I had my advisor, I need a qual specialist, I need a quant specialist, and I need an athletic specialist. And because my dissertation was on Latinx college athletes, I made sure like I had everything I needed. And funny story, the world's so small, like that person who was in athletics was actually one of Como's friends, Dr. Billy Hawkins. So just like, education's so small sometimes, it's so weird. Like,
just add that I think I think building on what you just said about like connections, you also want to think about letters of rec, because these will probably be some letter writers for you. So who will write you a good one? Maybe whose name carries some weight, and maybe who knows you well and can speak to your strengths. And I think that really matters, how strong the letter of rec is.
I guess I'll go. I had a kind of unique experience with my methodologist because George Markolides was a professor at UCR when I was going through the stats sequence, and now he's at UC Santa Barbara. And I already had that connection, and I wanted him to be my methodologist because we had worked closely together. And so he actually ended up being my outside person. So that kind of worked out. So it kind of goes back to that point about making connections and keeping those connections, and don't lose touch with people. If you're close to a professor and they leave, while you're there, there's potential for them to serve as your outside person. And of course, same advice as before about the timeline. You're going to want to work with your advisor, and your advisor will give you good advice for maybe, the third, it's always the third person. I feel like it's like, we know who the 2 people are going to be, but then you got to find that third person. So, for me, mine made sense because I was on a fellowship under Dr. O'Connor, who's also retired. I feel like everyone's retired who I worked with. I'm just old on this panel. But she was my third person, and it made sense because I was on a fellowship under her. But I think for a lot of people, it's finding that outside person or finding that third person. And I think your advisor, you should definitely get advice from your advisor about that.
so I was gonna add something, Sasha, that you said that was pretty funny, because you talked about how like the professors were leaving. Well, it's funny because like this dissertation committee was a mess for me, because 2 of my committee members were actually leaving to another university. So I was like, whoa, like what the hell? Like, so it was just like while they were leaving, like they only had like 1 year before they were considered outside members. So I was like, well, this doesn't help me at all. So it was just like a huge mess. Like dissertation committees are not perfect, like at all.
It's also a mess trying to schedule them all at one time to be there. That was a nightmare. But yeah, I think for me, my committee, it just kind of made sense. I had my advisor who's, I used 2 different existing data sets, and my advisor was my the chairperson, the main person on my committee, and then she was the PI of one of the data sets, and then Bruce Baker, who was the kind of the outside member from UCLA, and I was using his kind of data set, and then Keith Whitteman, who is the person I was taking advanced stats with, and he was so helpful. He would send me to like outside stats workshops and kind of fund my growth in those courses too. So of course he was on my committee as well. So I think it'll really just kind of depend on what makes sense for you and the scope of your work.
Thank you. Alyssa, do you have a question? I saw your screen popped up in front of me, so.
Yeah, I do have a question. So this is kind of in response to something Sasha said, but I feel like everyone can probably answer this. But you said something about like saying yes, like mostly saying yes. And I feel like I'm in the season of yeses, which is really great, but I'm only in my 2nd year. And so I'm like figuring out how to balance all of I'm just going to call them yeses, but I think, I mean like opportunities. So because like eventually you can't handle them all, right? So you like have to start to pick and choose. And I think the struggle is like, so you want a set of diverse experiences, but one thing I'm weighing, and this is kind of where my question is going, is like, does it also matter how long you're in that experience? So like, right, like this year I took on a lot of leadership experiences and realized like that's kind of not my thing, sitting on in on a bunch of meetings and on a bunch of boards. And so I'm kind of like dropping that. But I realized like, oh, maybe I should have been there for another year. You know what I mean? Like it seems like you have to balance the yeses at some point. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
Well, okay. I think that you are very insightful. Like, what you're, sorry, my baby is screaming in the background. You know what you you clearly have thought about, like, okay, what am I capable of, with these yeses. And I think that you could take the advice from our previous question, which is when people were saying like, look at the jobs that you want and what the requirements are, and then think about that in terms of your yeses, right? So for example, if you want to be a tenure track faculty member, then like I was on the IRB, like I said, that's like shows like that, what service is. I reviewed for journals. That shows that like you're in the field, keeping immersed in your research, and that you're good enough to be invited to review for journals, right? Like so, and that's something that as a tenure track faculty that people do. So I think like you said, being on a board, if it's really highly related to your area of research, then yes, say yes, right? But if it's something that's kind of tangential and you're like, I'm not really getting anything out, like you should also be getting things out of these opportunities. I liked it that in big quotes, because it's kind of like my department chair, when she can't find somebody to do something, she'll like volunteer us to do it instead of volunteer. She volunteers us. So I think you sometimes there are limits, and for your mental health, I do say learn to say no is a good skill as well. And I think I didn't really learn to say no as early as maybe I should. So I think it's good that you're having this self-reflection now. I don't know, maybe other people have better advice than me, because that was maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I, made you feel like you have to say yes to everything.
I think too, it's like, think about what you want to do, because if you want that faculty gig, you gotta always think about your research, teaching, and service, because that's what's gonna make your CV. That's what you're gonna put on your CV. And I think, it's funny because like, don't be afraid to say no, because here at Iowa State, like I get invited to serve on diversity committees like all day. And I'm like, I guess they ain't got a lot of Latino people out here. I mean, it's obviously Iowa, So it's pretty interesting because like those are the type of issues that I think about, and it's like sometimes you just got to deal with like that racial battle fatigue. And, as Sasha talked about, like that mental health, you're just kind of tired of it. So, now it's coming to a point where I'm like, okay, it's fine. I've done enough research, teaching, and service at this institution, because your service also has to be not just within the institution, but it also has to be nationally. If you're involved with conferences, like all that type of stuff makes a big difference. And that's how that networking comes in, as Suneal mentioned earlier, because all of that plays a big factor.
One thing I would do too is like in this reflection, because I think it's a really good idea to think about what you're getting out of the experience, and you don't want to spread yourself out too thin where you can't say yes to other opportunities that you're actually really interested in, right? So one thing that I would do is think about what Guillermo said, the research, teaching, and service, and kind of put your experiences, whatever they may be, whether it's going to a workshop or doing like a year-long, position within a board, all of your experiences within this document, just have it research, teaching, and service. And if kind of you feel like I have enough of this, I can, you can then move on, right? I have enough of service. I don't need to do this anymore. Then you can kind of see what else do you really need? What other experiences are you missing? And kind of be able to pursue that.
And one thing I'll add is I think have these communications with your advisor too, just so because they have a sense of where you're trying to go before you say yes to something. I almost said yes to an interview one time, like a journalist was emailed me to interview me, and I was like, oh, this seems like a cool opportunity, get my name out there, spend an hour with this journalist. The journalist was from like this campus something or other group that's really famous now for being a very conservative leaning group that tries to like get professors and get them like in trouble for being, race conscious. So I thankfully I emailed him before. I was like, I should agree to this, right? It's not a big deal. I'll talk to this reporter. They seem nice, but it would have been really bad. So I would just run things by your advisor to see if it makes sense for you to take on whatever service or opportunity, just so it's a good one for you.
Hey, Suneal, did you check the chat that I put?
What was that?
I put in the chat when you said that. I was like, always remember, the good journalists don't reach out to you.
Yeah. No, this was a media opportunity, and so like good media will reach out to you. But yeah, that's true. Don't watch for those journal calls too. Those are always predatory sometimes.
Other questions?
I realize that students are having to leave for class. So I just wanted to mention that we talked about having a writing group and how important that is, especially during, COVID when we are limited and how often we kind of see each other. But I am forming a summer writing group for students in the Search Lab. And so I can kind of pass along that information to you, Eddie, and if you want to share it with others, that's absolutely fine.
Please do. It looks like there's a few that have to break for class, but we still have some that are on here. So we are scheduled till 2:30. We do not have to go till 2:30. Are there other questions from the group?
I have one because I'm going to be writing my first portion of my dissertation this whole summer. So how exactly do you balance multiple roles or multiple projects? I guess you all touched on like saying yes, saying no, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to juggle all those multiple roles.
A good calendar. I block off time. I mean, I've even, gotten better even about this with COVID, because before I was like, okay, I'm going to be in my office, so I'll, do these things during the, no, it's like, now it's like this hour is devoted to this hour. And I think that actually the more I've moved, for me personally, the more I've moved in that direction where, I mean, some people do the writing block every day, but beyond that, those other roles too, right? Like even things like, my grading, my I have to fill out this report for this grant, like anything that I just like schedule everything out, make my own deadlines. And I think that if I, I mean, I think as a grad student, it's a good skill to get. And I also want to kind of even point out Yaz's point too, which kind of relates to this. Keeping that list of all your things you're doing too is a good skill to have as a grad student too, because you're good if you do a tenure track position, organizing all that stuff also can become a burden. But if you get these skills honed in now, it will help you as you move forward.
It looks like we had a question in the chat from Jackie, but she has to leave. I'm not sure if you all maybe want to respond to it, because others might benefit from the question around what was your timeline after the written qualifying exams? So if one of your milestone, and many of you are affiliated with UCR, at least I think half of you are, after your written exams, what was that timeline like? So I'm assuming that the question was more so around, how long did it take you to cross the finish line? What were the other things that in between crossing the finish line that you had to engage in?
As a non-UCR person, I'll pass it over to Sasha and Jess.
Honestly, I don't remember. I am trying to like rack my brain. I don't remember. I feel like I definitely spent the last year mostly focused on my dissertation. And then like some of you had said, juggling some of these other things, like other papers I was working on and but I also think things have changed a bit. So I think like the year I did my dissertation, people weren't really, at least in special ed, weren't doing like the 3 papers instead of a traditional dissertation. Like mine's still a traditional dissertation that was really, really long. And then I had to like condense it into 2 papers later on. Like if you get that option to do papers, do that, because that's way more time. It just makes way more sense. I guess as soon as you can start, right? That would be the advice. Like, if you're after your qualifying exam, take a little break, because those are really intense. When I took them, there were no notes. I know that that's also changed at UCR. So good job, UCR, for moving the needle forward. But I think that, as soon as you have an idea, the sooner you start, the more you can spread it out. And for me, the timeline after that was two years until I graduated. I defended in May. I do remember that. I remember May.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time remembering too. I know I started in 2014 and ended in 2018. So last year was spent in dissertation mode, as well as kind of working on other things as well. But yeah, last year was dissertation mode, and kind of just kept on the timeline that was like loosely structured and provided for me by the GSOE. So I talked to Heather quite a bit when I was in grad school and kind of working through, my milestones, and my advisor as well. But I think like even in the special education track versus, for example, the school psychology track, they're very different in terms of requirements and things you kind of have to accomplish to get to the next step. So I would tap into Heather as a resource and your advisor.
I can tell the USC timeline. I remember it. I think we finished our qual. I finished my quals in the spring, and then that summer I did my dissertation proposal, and then that rest of the whole year was like 12 months to do the dissertation. But I kind of started a little before I did the dissertation proposal with some like data gathering, just because I figured the dissertation proposal would get approved, at least in some form. So got a little bit of a head start. So I got some more time to collect data.
Let me, is there any more questions? I have one more question for the panelists, but I'm happy to get another question in from our graduate students. So maybe a question to kind of maybe get you to think a little bit, reflect in hindsight. So what do you know now? Or is there anything you know now that you wish you would have known during your graduate program?
I feel like I just keep talking, but I'll go if no one else wants to go. A couple things. One is that the level of competitiveness that there is in getting a tenure track job, and also not taking things I think you have to not take things personally in academia as it is, like journal reviews, rejections all the time, right? Like all these things. But I think that it's important to know that when you're applying for jobs, that there's a lot of factors. I think Guillermo kind of touched on this a little bit in his answer earlier. There's a lot of factors that go in, and just because you don't get an interview isn't a reflection on you as a person or even as a researcher, because sometimes departments, they'll post, like we do this, post very broadly, just in case we get somebody in these like wings that we really want, but really we're really looking for this, right? But like people are applying, and then, we're narrowing down a pool of 100, 200 to, to 2. So, or 1, right? So it's important, I think, to give yourself grace. So I think that, when I was applying to jobs, I felt really disappointed. Like, it felt like, I got publications when I was in grad school. I did all these extra things. Like, why is this so hard? Like, my advisors told me that I was a great candidate for, a research job. And, and I think that, just if I could go back and tell myself, like, this is harder than, like sometimes your advisors might even, especially, if they're older, it might be even harder than they realize, because when they were on the job market, I don't think it was as competitive and tricky as it is now.
Yeah, everything Sasha said is true. Like, keep preaching. Like, but it's just crazy to think about it. When you, as a graduate student, you're applying to these assistant professor gigs, and like the reality is, you're competing against postdocs, you're competing against other assistant professors. So like, just that is just insane to think about. It's like, and like the reality is, it's like it's out of your control, because like most of the time they already have someone in mind who they're going to hire. So there's all these factors that go into the job market, and it's just insane to think about. It's a funny story, because like, actually, it's like, Sasha, you've been going through my emails, because like today I got a rejection email from a job, and this is the second time they sent me this rejection email. So I'm like, damn, they must have really hated my stuff. Like, hey, in case you didn't get it the first time, here's the second rejection. I was like, oh, sick. Like, thanks, y'all. So it's just like, and and the reality is, like, to that, like, some of these jobs don't even give you emails saying you didn't get the job. So just, it's just things to think about. And the funny thing is that I had a couple of job offers this year, and I had these 2 assistant professor gigs, and then I had another postdoc gig at a very prestigious university. And I talked to my advisors, like, that's a really good postdoc opportunity, because the reality is, if you want like a good assistant professor gig, the job is so competitive. Sometimes people have 2 postdocs. It's just so ridiculous to think about. But you got to play that system sometimes, this white hegemonic system, that just that title of assistant professor kind of puts you on the top of the stack. So it's just things like that you got to think about. It's this kind of white supremacy type of world that we live in.
I think I'm in a little bit of a unique situation, in that I expected to be on the job market last year, and then COVID happened. And as you all probably know, the opportunities were very slim. And so it was a bit of a challenge to kind of think about, to not take it personally, and to not kind of get down on myself. And instead, I had to really get creative and think of ways to maximize my time, right? And to really like get involved in things and beef up my CV in ways that I would still be competitive coming out of this, right? So writing grants and participating in a lot of mentorship programs, and again, just guest lecturing, right? So doing saying yes, right? And doing a lot of things that I thought and I think will end up benefiting me once jobs do open up. So I guess the point is that it's not always a direct line, from A to B to C, and sometimes you have to get creative and think of alternatives. So that's something that I would think about in advance. Is what happens if I don't get that, assistant professor position? What if I don't get that postdoc I wanted, right?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think everybody kind of captured it. I think that the big thing is just knowing that, the more you get rejected, the more you learn. I think you learn the ability to learn from rejection, learn from, those experiences, I think is really the important piece. And I was in a rut last year. I had a horrible 2019. I was like, 2020 is going to be my year. And then pandemic hit. But, in spite of all that, I had a much better year professionally. I got a lot more acceptances. So I think even though you're losing, you have a lot of rejections at one point, a lot of this is luck and it'll turn around, so just keep plugging away, keep trying to learn, keep trying to improve, and most likely it will. 2023, yeah.
We will leave it there. Thank you so much, panelists, for hopefully stretching the knowledge base of our graduate students, getting them something to think about. Hopefully this is the beginning and not the end of a continuous exploration of how they can position themselves for opportunities, how they can advance their dissertation. And, we're hoping to have many more professional development opportunities so that when they leave Riverside, they can say that, yes, I was well positioned. I was exposed to a lot of things. Exposure leads to expansion of the mind. Hopefully expansion leads to new possibilities. And so I am grateful that you spent the time and energy here to share your stories, your interests, your wisdoms with our graduate students and grad students. I don't want them to inundate you all with emails and questions, but I'm hoping that on some level, they'll be able to touch base with you all if they have questions. And of course, that you all can collaborate on some level. So, hey, the emails are already flowing. So thank you all for that. Heather, did you have any final thoughts?
I just thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see you. Yeah, it's been a while. And of course, all the students that I know. I'm excited that this was the kickoff to this new series, and we'll have another one in the fall about grant writing and external funding opportunities. So that will be new, and we will be strategic in when we offer it in the fall, and then a second one in the spring based on the funding sources.
And maybe we can get the panelists on campus sometime next year if interested. So yeah, we'll certainly cross paths soon. All the best as you finish up your academic year. I know Suneal, you said you just finished up. So enjoy your summer months, and hopefully 2021-22 academic year will be certainly much better, because 2020 looked really good through my rearview mirror, and I don't want to look back at that. I mean, we can learn from that, but there was a lot that played out. So thank you all again. I'm rambling. Appreciate you and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.